Greetings, friends. I'm excited to bring you this interview with Richard Bruxvoort Colligan, who is your guest composer for this worship series. I want to tell you right off the bat, Richard and I have been friends for a long time, and for a long time, ever since I've known him, he's had a thing for the Psalms. He's a composer of congregational songs. You'll hear him speak more about that in this interview. But Richard's music has been published by the alphabet soup of denominations: UCC, UMC, ELCA, PCUSA, and the DOC. He earned his MA in Theology and the Arts from United Theological Seminary in the Twin Cities and is currently earning his DMin via Eden Seminary in St. Louis. Richard serves as cantor at Olive Branch Community in Rochester, Minnesota, and he lives in Strawberry Point, Iowa. Besides his work for this series, you can access more of his prolific materials at both worldmaking.net and psalmimmersion.com. You can also go to patreon.com/RichardBC or /RichardBC if you want to continue to receive more Richard songs each month with his subscription service. We are deeply grateful for his collaboration with Worship Design Studio and access and permission to use these songs in our worship series. Richard, my friend, it's so great to see you again there in your Psalmist workshop.
That's about what it is. That's where the anvil goes, where I hammer out the sparks flying, have a thing on, and yeah. And there's the Worship Design Studio.
That's right. That's where the magic happens. Even though it's a Zoom background, and we all know about that these days.
Well, we all know, yeah, right.
Yeah. So friends, I've introduced you to Richard, and now you get to hear Richard himself. I just wanted you to get a little more information about who Richard is, because he's going to be a guest in your worship during this series. So Richard, tell us a little bit about how you got enamored with the Psalms, and I know you must be, because we did an earlier series together about the Psalms, and that was years ago. So you've been at this for quite a while. So you must be enamored and continually enamored with the Psalms. Tell us about your origin story with where the Psalms, grabbed you and said,
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to do some work together.
I am enamored. I've been enamored. My origin story, I was bit by a spider, a psalm spider. No, it wasn't. No. I grew up in a liturgical tradition. So I grew up Missouri Synod Lutheran. And so the Psalms were really embedded in worship. And so that meant from a really young age, well, before I could read, I had Psalms memorized. That's one of the gifts of a liturgical tradition, that you have what some say, you have the word written in your heart. And to this day, if I run across a page like Psalm 95, that was the Venite on page 15 of the worship book I grew up in. And for the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. And the whole text is right here.
Yeah.
So I think at a young age, I was introduced to a theology that was spun through with music and expression and passion. And then fast forward, I think when I finished seminary almost 20 years ago, I knew at that point that I was not just a singer-songwriter that I had been doing, on the side from doing concerts, but I really was enthralled with the idea of community singing. And the magic that happens, the gospel moment that can be proclaimed and shared when we are singing together. And so take the passion for the Psalms and the sort of newfound vocation of being a writer for community songs, and they just kind of came together.
Well, and certainly what folks are going to find as they live with your songs through this series is that they become earworms. I mean, talk about community songs. There's something in it it's easy to catch on fairly quickly, and then you can just really sink into it. And I was a friend of mine, a friend of ours, Chuck Bell as well, and he texted me just yesterday. He said, I saw your announcement about Richard's music, and I listened to it, and now I can't get it out of my head. Well, Welcome, friends, to your master songwriter of earworms, Richard
Well,
Bruxvoort Colligan.
what's great about the Psalms is that as a writer, as a composer, look, if you take those texts as the starting place for these songs, I mean, they suggest what the style needs to be and the tone and the key. So the laments are probably not going to sound real happy,
Right.
and there are going to be some minor tones to that, for example. And the text of one of the things where the psalmists are wrestling with where is God in the midst of this trouble, well, that's going to have a different groove than something that's just really about gratitude. My wife said, what happens with me is what happens when somebody raised on the Beatles tries to write songs around the Psalms.
That's great. That's great. Well, I do really appreciate the way that it seems like you pick out of the psalm the ethos of it, and that's what you give us. So you give us this handhold at of the deeper kind of just feel of the message as well, but also the feel of it. And I think that people are really going to enjoy that, because that's really what we're after in proclaiming these sacred texts, is to get to the feel, the ethos of it, the main message, because that's then what really touches our own lives in our own situation.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me into that.
Yeah.
I think your work with this, I mean, will especially be serving people in probably just a different way. Ministry looks so weird right now in pandemic time. And so for me, partnerships with all kinds of other artists and liturgists have meant even more this last year.
Yeah, that's right. So, let's talk about this fact that we're creating this in pandemic. There will be churches who will be doing this in later years, and that won't be as prominent an issue. But this is really where this is being born, and there is an affinity. I mean, when I thought about what could we use in the new year as we continue to try to have the patience and try to have the fortitude and the endurance at this point in many months of pandemic, I thought, what could help us express? And really, as I read the Revised Common Lectionary selections, the Psalms, every one of them had a really important message for us in this moment. And so let's talk just a little bit about the Psalms as a genre, as a poetic genre, over a span of time where also people were dealing with isolation and exile and the rebuilding of community and the frustration with, where am I, who am I, where is God? The Psalms are a way that they did that. So tell us a little bit about this genre of the Psalms.
Well, as many of y'all might know, the Psalms are musical. And so as a text in Scripture, they're different than epistles, other people's mail. They're different than an apocalyptic or wisdom books or history or a gospel. This is a specific time of literature, and this is music. This is musical. So you won't find the theology of the psalmists described in doctrinal ways necessarily. They will be maybe more imaginative. I think those of us that are poets or songwriters or drama people or painters, sculptors, probably will resonate with this. That even in a lot of the Psalms, embedded right in the text are directions. Embedded right in the text are directions for the music leader, for the director of music, and I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So approaching Scripture as music that was indigenous to a particular people at a particular time. And Marcia, I love that you brought out, this is a community that had been struggling, wrestling, so much so that the name of this community, Israel, is Jacob's name that was changed, and it means to struggle, to wrestle with God and prevail somehow. So it is a brave thing. It's a brave thing to look at the Psalms and to say, maybe this is a vocabulary of faith from our tradition that we might even adopt. And, I think in my project, I haven't been immersed now for like 20 years. the Psalms really are my central, kind of my central formation. And so I always think, what will happen to me if I immerse myself in these texts, these stories, and this passionate work of our ancestors?
Well, and that's what we hope that worship will do for us in these times, is give
Yeah,
us
yeah,
some way to express when it's really hard to touch or to grasp what the ramifications of this moment are.
yeah. I thank God for the majority of the Psalms are not just straight joy celebration. Most of them are laments. They're about people who are bewildered and confused and push back against God. God, you said you were going to be our covenant God. I'm thinking of, was this Psalm 85, I think, or 80? But God, we really need your help. So,
Yeah.
Get back here and start acting like the God you said you were going to be.
Yeah. And
That
then
sense of,
it's interesting that even in Psalms of Lament, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, you'll end in praise. It's say, but you are God. And so we're counting on you because you are God and we know that you're going to show up. We know that you are a good God. We know that you are with us. And that's really the heart of the series name, God is Holding Your Life, based on the title of the song that you created. That ultimately, God is holding our lives. Even in those moments when it's difficult to see that, know that, understand that, to rest in the assurance of that is where we must be in order to have the strength to move on.
oh, I couldn't say that any better, Marcia. Yeah, thank you. I think sometimes when I do workshops on lament for congregations, because most congregations need practice doing
Right.
lament, I think
Permission too.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's a sense of, why would we do that? Like, and they imagine, oh, we're just gonna be walking around somber and weepy and no fun at all anymore if we do that. But like you were saying, there's a trajectory to the literature of the
Mhm.
laments. All but
Mhm.
one psalm start out with complaint and describe just honestly, nakedly how bad things are. God, there's some things that need to change. And almost all of them end up with gratitude and
Yeah.
trust and praise. And so to engage the lament is not just to mope around and complain and rah rah rah. No, it is to sort of ride the what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would describe as many dimensions of grief, which includes a sense of wholeness.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of what I'm asking or suggesting that folks could do in this series is to get testimonies from people about how they have experienced God holding them in this time. And so I want to close this just with asking you if you want to have there been moments for you in these last few months of pandemic where you felt the presence of God in that way that you were being held?
Hmm. What a good question. What a good question to invite people into. My tradition, Lutheran tradition, isn't great with testimonies. And yet there's so much value to describe. What is God doing in your life? Really, really, just tell us. Tell us today what is going on. Remind us the reality of God stirring us and inspiring us and bothering us. I think this sounds so silly right now. When the pandemic shut down happened, I really did think to myself, well, thank God I'm an introvert because this is going to be so much easier for me than extroverts or people that
Mm,
need to be out among people.
mm,
There's probably a little truth to that, but it hasn't been a walk in the park for any of us, has it?
right.
Um, as somebody who's lived with depression
Mm,
for the last 30 years, I always sort of need to be monitoring my mood and my energy and stuff like that.
mhm.
And then in this pandemic time, like doubly so. One of the gifts of the pandemic, or one of the, I don't even know if I can say gifts. I don't even want to. One of the things I've noticed that has been a learning for me and that I've appreciated is to know the people I really do lean into and the people I can call on or process just the weirdness, the bewilderment of pandemic life. That kind of clarity I know I wouldn't have had before.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's one of the reasons why I've suggested testimony is because um, we've asked preachers to be the harbingers of hope week after week, to say a good word for us and to help us get through this. And preachers are not the only ones who can help us. We're a body together. We all have things that we can say, and that is the tradition of the Psalms, is that it's people expressing themselves, and we need the whole body of voices to help us get through this. And so we're going to hopefully encourage each other, not just lean on preachers. They need encouragement too. So
For sure.
yeah.
And we're all in different seasons of understanding the pandemic. Some of us, our theology has changed because of our experiences in the pandemic. So over my life since I was little, growing up, I've been through phases of being, having a kid's faith, going to Sunday school and church with my family, to owning my own faith. I was in a fundamentalist phase for a while, very much an atheist phase for a while, and comfortable with agnostic seasons. Doubt and question is a rich part of my faith life, I would say, and all that is in the mix. So I love that you're inviting all those voices of all of us together to be, I don't know if I've heard that before, harbingers of hope. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Richard Bruxvoort Colligan, thank you for filling our lives with music for the first 7 weeks of the year, or whenever people are doing this series, once it's out there. It really is a true gift, and I'm so very grateful that you agreed to collaborate on this.
You're welcome. Thank you, Marcia.